All right, so we have Atlas Talisman, who runs Open World Theater. Atlas has a bunch of different stuff going on at all times. He's usually running these workshops in person, but it's going really well online. You're in New Zealand, so you got locked down again, back into the bunker.
Yeah, back into the bunker.
With Fanny. And so Atlas is a comedian, but a game designer. So you're in school too, and you're learning coding because you actually want to create games.
Yeah, I feel like learning to code, learning to program opens you into an algorithmic way of thinking. And I think that it's very much paired in my mind with spirituality, with personal growth, looking at patterns, looking at systems. I think that everything is a system, whether it be our organic body or our societal system or a relationship or our relationship with the universe spiritually, you know, the planets, all these sort of things. Taking an engineer's perspective, I think is a really healthy way to try and learn more about truth.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's amazing. So have you found deeper insights just from, I think you've only been in school now for a year to 6 months. Is that correct?
This particular degree, yeah. I'm actually deferring it for the next 6 months and continuing next year, but that's just so I can focus full time on open world. But yeah, the coding part has been an on and off hobby, passion, frustration for quite a few years. I don't think I've found like deep spiritual or personal transcendence yet through maths or through code, but I do feel the power of abstraction. Like they say that everything can be explained through maths. And I'm also seeing how rudimentary the computer functions are. It's, even though from the outside you think, wow, computers so complex and so amazing. Learning the syntax of how to type things in is a bit tricky. And for myself, not being mathematically inclined, like I dropped that in high school, it's been tricky to go through, yeah, trigonometry and algebra and calculus and things like that. But it's very simple. It's based, obviously, as most people know, on this binary of on and off, of true or false, this Boolean logic of true, false, true, false. So a lot of things are just like conditional statements. If this, then that, or loop this many times and then exit, or like very rudimentary things. And so it's quite genius to be able to take all of the desires of humanity through our interaction, through our logistics, business, our entertainment, and codify everything into just on or off. And yeah, you have to remove your personal investment. You've got to not be so flavored by your story, which definitely relates to open world, because it's all about state versus story in my modality of theater and, you know, cathartic arts. So I like that part where it's just like, it doesn't matter what you feel, it doesn't matter what your grand vision is. Can you bring it down to a for loop or to a conditional statement? So that's pretty humbling.
That's really cool because it's like binary one or two, right? Isn't that
Zero,
how?
0 and 1. Yeah. It's just
Zero
on.
and one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm excited, but I would hate to assume that I know, but I just love those logistics and that function. I think my brain works like that. So
Yeah, and I think as well, looking at where we as a collective are going, and this is something that I always plug into, is like the modern myth. And I do believe we are storytelling as a culture, and we're doing that through our peace and our violence, through our entertainment and through our business and our politics, through our little conversations and gossip circles with our friends, through our dreaming. Like it's this, as Joseph Campbell says, it's a monomyth. You know, we have told it through our sacred texts, but I think we're also telling it real time in a singular way, but through many different portals of our media. And one of the key things that we're telling at the moment is this idea of technology and humanity coming together. And some people feel like that's a bit abhorrent. It's like, oh, you're going to make us inhumane. We need to get back to nature. And I understand the reason for that, because a lot of our technology has come from an industrial revolution, which is very hard, patriarchal, metallic, very manipulative, as far as we take our resources from the earth in a destructive way. We don't close the loop. Nature always closes the loop. Like everything is used, everything dissolves, it's symbiotic and cyclic. Whereas the human construction is that it ends up in a waste pile or there's a lot of pollution. So I understand why we don't like technology because it seems very anti-nature. But I think that technology is just a tool set. And as things become more refined and subtle, I think the closed loop with nature can be achieved. And, you know, we might just have an interface which is very jelly-like or very natural or internal, or it helps us interact with trees or expand our senses, not to create a false layer. Because I think people feel technology is like this artificial thing. But I think it can actually just expand our senses to take in more of reality, because I think most people would admit that our human senses are somewhat limited. And then there's the subjective egoic mental filter on top of that, which further abstracts us from the direct experience. And if there is even some kind of universal truth, you know, objective truth, that's definitely arguably not the case. So I guess what I'm excited about is the capacity for technology to expand our senses, whether that be through augmented reality, virtual reality, through the Internet of Things, through intuitive devices with artificial intelligence, through, I don't know exactly where it would go to, but I really like the feeling of just bearing witness to life more. I think that is an ultimate prayer. And I think if nothing else, after pondering life, I think that's what I feel we're here to do. I don't know if any of our projects, any of our religions, any of our businesses, any of our nations really matter. I don't know. They might, but they might not. But I think that the through line or the common denominator of humanity is that we witness and we tell stories with what we witness. We have these senses and we take in as best we can reality. We have this model, this construct that we assemble. You know, we pair things up, like my sight mixing with what I hear, mixing with my taste, mixing with the tactile sensation, and this is probably what reality kind of feels like out there. Um, that's like a really universal function. And then we very passionately tell each other about it through our opinions, through our religions, through our patterns of story, our clothing. Like we paint pictures of sunsets, or we tell stories about falling in love or heartbreak or whatever it is. So that seems to be pretty universal. And I like things that are universal because they seem to therefore work or hold true in natural law. So that I feel is our prayer. That is at least one function I'm pretty certain of, is that we are here to witness life. And then tell stories about it in whatever form, whether it be a story or not, we share it. We're a mimetic culture. We like to echo each other and take on characteristics and qualities of each other. I'm not sure if you found this, but like when I spend a lot of time with someone, if I really like them, I start to mimic them. I start to assume their gesture or like their turn of phrase or their hand movements, whatever it is. And I think this is also a way of continuing to live. I know Jason Silva talks about, and this is not from him, but I think it's maybe a Mexican turn of phrase to do with the three deaths. The first death being when you physically die. Oh no, sorry, wrong. The first death is when you realize you're mortal. So many of us have already had that first death. The second death is being when you actually physically are no longer here, or your energy is not present in this form. And the third death is the last time someone says your name. So this is this idea of being shared, of being echoed, of being remembered, or having your essence go forward. And I know that it's quite a common thing, particularly in Christianity, to ask, what would Jesus do? Or what would your role model, what would your deity do? And when I was a kid, I reflected on this and I was like, oh, but I don't know about that. I think you're just going to interpret what you want to do and then put Jesus' face on it. But now that I've had some like long-term friends and relationships, I feel to some degree you can ask, what would they do? You know, how would my friend Frank or Jessica, like if you really know their view of life, their perspective, how their senses arrange things and their logic juggles life, I think it's a valid thing. And therefore you can kind of be accompanied by another person throughout your life, even after they're gone. And so that kind of the last time someone says your name, or you could say the last time someone thinks of you, is kind of the last time you're being summoned, or your particular constellation of senses and logic is being used by humanity. So yeah, I think that's why kind of this mimetic sharing has a function within our culture.
I think it's really amazing what you're saying, and I'm getting so much but it's really specifically like the technology. As you know, I've kind of converged quantum physics, astrology, and depth psychology into human technology. But I think what you're saying and what you're bringing in together, and I don't know if you have an understanding of this, um, but through my lens is the convergence of another soul, through the mimicry of that pair is almost a computer generated simulation that is written in code, because you are taking that, but you're actually creating a new archetype with that person, where
Definitely.
you get to become someone and they become someone to you, but it becomes an intimate pairing within you. It's like it's a part of you, right? And we're all doing parts work, as we're processing, and that's what your open world theater is all about too, is moving through the parts of ourselves that are uncomfortable, and moving into the more comfortable, um, whole self. um, so so if that's binary code though, right, that mimicry, that shared experience, that information that comes in, that becomes a part of yourself, um, that you get to hold on to after someone leaves. And then the other part that took my breath away was kind of like, I didn't realize what you were saying at first, but then you're saying the last time someone says your name, it was like, and then I thought, oh, while I'm still alive? No, but it was like, no, like after you're gone. So that brought in a whole level of like, oh, like you exist beyond um, that. And I'm just wondering, your brain is so amazing. I'm wondering if this is all connected though, because like what I'm hearing you even say with technology is bringing that feminine space into technology, because there is a fear of the masculine kind of distorting this technological framework and using it against us, right?
Yes, totally.
Um, and so bringing in, and what I've found with Aquarian energy and the ripples of space time is that technology is actually feminine, and it is the fluid time exchange of those ripples and those data systems that like flow in no time. um, and I'm just riffing now, but
Mm,
I just love the framework, and it's like,
mm.
if you have anything else.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, definitely. I think, you're mentioning the technology, and this is, I think, really important for my part of the conversation, is to really show the way that this technology, or this metaphor, the analogy we're using, totally maps to spirituality and to nature. And I guess the simplest way I think of a binary fluctuation is simply the pulse of life. It's polar. It's on and off, which means it's destroyed or it's created. It's the in and out breath of prana. Yeah, the duality of masculine and feminine, all these kind of things. I mean, that is technology. You can make a computer based purely on that. Like anything that has a pulse can be the engine for the running of anything through a magnet or whatever it is, regardless of specifics. Um, so I think I like what you're saying about technology being feminine. That makes sense. I guess this idea of like Shiva Shakti, of the form or the presence or witness, and then the dance that goes through the structure. And that's completely accurate. And I think we like to think that technology, to be predictable, is the structure, is the hardware, but actually it is chaotic. Yeah, the exchange of data, particularly with things like the internet, where it's peer to peer, and that's closer to reality, because we all have a capacity to be a source of something. I can add to the network, I can give my version, my perspective. And Naylor often likes the analogy of, we're all looking at the same elephant, but just through a different hole. You know, that idea of it's like an elephant in a box, and I can see its foot, you can see its trunk, someone else can see its tail. We often talk about that analogy as far as our perspective. And we're all looking at the same thing. We're all talking about the same thing. We're all aspiring to the same thing, but we're so passionate about our ankle or our ear or our nose that we can see. But I think that's where it is valuable, because in order to, for if it is just the universe witnessing itself, that ankle is as important as the nose, and it's in relation to where that ankle is in compared to the nose that we start to piece the whole elephant together, and then we can celebrate the universe. Then the universe can come to know itself. So yeah, this idea of the feminine, being the flow, being the experience, being sometimes the chaotic unknown, that is definitely a key part of technology. And yeah, when you're talking about the parts, this is where the box gets dissolved. You know, this chart I have behind me with the orbits was broken into archetypes, and I'm really wanting to actually dissolve that. I was in a process a couple of weeks ago, and I was thinking archetypes are not very open world because they're another restriction. There's another compartmentalization of self and other, and that's why I really want to go from thinking of parts needing to meet each other back into just the state of existence. And this is where this concept of embodied prayer comes in. And it's simultaneously masculine and feminine. And I think that, you know, men's religion has been quite stringent and orthodox. We've been didactic and dogmatic. We've said, you know, if you don't pray in this way, then you don't get access to God. And the way I think of embodied prayer is like coming down to the ocean, and you've got a bunch of toddlers on the shore, and they're going like, I made the ocean. You're like, okay, cool, cool. Do you want to go? Do you want to go and swim? Yeah, well, I'd like that. You have to come down here. I have to wear this scuba diving equipment, otherwise you can't get wet. And you're like, whoa, I mean, we are surrounded by water. Like if I go in the other direction, I'm also going to get, no, it's cool. Like, okay, I'll listen to you. I'll put on this scuba diving equipment. So, and I'll come down to you and I'll be like, cool. So what is the ocean like? And go, I call it the sea. And like, all right, that's cool. Cool. Ocean or sea. Like, what's it like? Well, when I was in the ocean, I was thinking about pizza. It was like a big pizza. Like, whoa, wait. Like, it was cool that was your experience being in the ocean. That's really beautiful. And pizza's great. Like, maybe we can have some afterwards. But what's the ocean like? And we keep coming to this idea of like trying through the masculine religions, which are possessive or exclusive, coming to a request for communion with God, because that's the unity. I think that's what we all want, is to know. We want to feel, we want to experience, and we want to sort of join with God in some way, or realize our own inner divinity, or realize there is nothing, whatever it is, but we're truth seekers. But in seeking the truth, we abstract it. And that's the paradox. We take something and then we naturally change it as we try and pass it on to someone else because we're interpreting it, or because it was a moment. It was the moment that you were transcendent. It was the moment you came into communion in your particular constellation. Maybe you were praying, maybe you were fasting, maybe you were on psychedelics, maybe you were near death experience. I don't know. But we therefore want to catalyze a modality. We want to set it, we want to record it and pass it on. Like I said, because we're mimetic, we want to share it as part of our survival. And it's beautiful. It's like, if I experience God, I want to tell you. But then we get far too attached to the symbols, and they become, I believe, almost blasphemy. They become the arrogance of human-centered definition of God, which claims God itself, which is, of course, the opposite. It's the deification of ourselves. And so with embodied prayer, my definition of that is to try, if we can, to strip away the story, remove all symbols, remove all names of saints, remove all external reference points, which is scary, because then are we just becoming ignorant again? Like, we've codified all the sacred geometry and things like that, and I know they are tools definitely to enlightenment of some kind, but just as another approach. And this is something that I'd encourage, particularly because we're talking about masculinity, which loves logic, which loves something that can be owned, which loves a boys' club or just some club to be a part of. Can we come into what could be considered a feminine type of prayer, which is embodied, which is where you simply feel and you breathe. And through meditation, you shift away from your interpretation of anything and just become the experience itself. And talking about tools, before this interview, I said, you know, I'd like to share a couple of tools. I might pepper them throughout the chat. One of the ways I've found this, and this is quite widely known, is the idea of breath, movement, and sound. So this isn't necessarily going to, be a new tool for many. But I feel that our spine is really important. This is my personal experience. If you look at the work of someone like Joe Dispenza, who I think merges the scientific and the spiritual quite well, he talks about the idea of the cerebrospinal fluid. And I was looking just yesterday at, I'm not sure, it might be in Kabbalah. It could be, anyway, it's these two trees. It's the tree of life and the tree of knowledge. And the one is coming from our heart, and it's the circulation. And the other is the central nervous systems coming from our brain down our nervous system through our nerve endings. And I think that's a really beautiful way to think of ourselves. We think of ourselves as this compartmentalization identity. But what happens if we are a brain in a jar, AKA a brain in a human jar? This is like a container. And we are afloat in senses, and we are piecing together as best we can reality simply from signals. It's just like a switchboard, and we get what we can. There's wavelengths, there's UV, there's Wi-Fi, there's things I can't sense, and to me they're invisible. There's also the very slow shift of tectonic plates, and I think that we have this window of human capacity to experience, and that becomes real to us. For example, the wall here is of a sufficient scale, and both in space and time, that it's real to me. But if something is too fast for me, like even faster than a mosquito, the vibration of an atom, it can be so quick that it could move through me, or it's come and it's gone before I even knew. So to me, it didn't exist. It was invisible. Or something so slow, like maybe right now, there's some tectonic plate about to shift and break open the floor beneath me, but it'll take centuries. So it doesn't even exist to me. So we have this very kind of particular window of experience that extricates a version of reality. And that's kind of, for me, one of the ways that I understand multidimensionality. It's not necessarily that we have these tangent timelines that are completely different, and we might, I'm not saying we don't, but there's just one version of multidimensionality, is that they are layered over each other almost holographically. And we just have a access point and we assemble that. But I do believe there's lots of things through me, over me, under me, around me that I'm a part of that are very real as my laptop here. But it's just irrelevant to my particular experience. So this form of meditation is attempting to soften the edges. Like imagine dissolving the edges of our sentience. Thinking with this, as I said, Joe Dispenza talks about the cerebrospinal fluid. So really thinking of ourselves as just a brain and this jelly-like nerve endings that come through our body. And coming back to that as the I. And I think the breath is a beautiful undulation that brings us into that. And then hopefully we can lose ourselves in the midnight of the void, where we're no longer needing a frame of self-reference, and then we just become the experience. And if life is just a universe trying to experience itself, I think we're pretty close to achieving our goal at that state, where we are just, I remember being in a meditation and I felt like everything was just a big lake of atoms, including me. Like there wasn't me, it was isness, like this is what is. And then the only concept of I was like a filament. I was like a single electric string pulsing. Maybe, I don't know what that pulse was. Maybe it was my breath, maybe it was my heart, I'm not sure. But there was a pulse. And I experienced every moment in this orgasmic bliss. It was just like, ah, ah, ah. And I think it sounds philosophic and esoteric, but I think that's actually what's going on in our bodies. I remember moments from my childhood, like I've got access to being quite young, and I know what it's like to be in trust. I was in a very safe family home, and I know what it's like. You see babies, they're so soft, and that's the only way we can really be born is, our skulls sort of need to have these plates which go over each other. We have to complete, like our limbs need to squeeze through and be contorted. We've got such a state of surrender. And that is ultimately a lot of my work comes back to, is innocence. So I've said a lot, but to try and wrap it all together, my encouragement is for all people, particularly men, to approach whatever you see to be truth or enlightenment from an embodied state rather than from a mental state. Do that through the body, through undulating your spine to enhance this jellyfish of knowledge to just be in the water of your body. And then become acutely aware. Some people call it like deep listening. when you're just about sensation. You just want to feel, you just want to feel. And often through repetition, the mind can let go. That's why I think a lot of religions have these kind of trance-like things, whether it be with prayer beads or whether it be rocking or whether it be mantras or whatever it is. We can lock the physical into a loop so that the mind can put it on automatic and no longer has to be calculating all the time. And therefore, the embodied state of prayer can really be experienced. And that's where we let go. That's where we actually find existence beyond our identity. And that leads to another point, which I'll throw back to you for any chatting about this, but it brings back to this point that I mentioned before is, are we kings over a kingdom, or are we just security guards guarding or protecting an apparent kingdom which someone else has imposed upon us? And that is, I think, wrapped up in a lot of identity and attachment to those things we can fathom through our senses and therefore possess. But I think the true freedom and the true richness and society going forward, including economies and health and all these sort of things, comes from that embodied state where we still the mind long enough to no longer use our symbols as an interface and start to sense that greater freedom. That's what open world is all about. An open world video game doesn't have artificial boundaries. You can go in any direction and engage with any non-player character you like in any sequence. And that's just true. I mean, I can literally walk in any direction on this planet. And the artificial map drawn borders on our globe are human constructs. They don't actually delineate between country and this and that. So that is what one of the things I'd like to call out for men to do is to engage in embodied prayer. And this is where the femininity comes in, because it's very feeling and it's very unknown, it's very mysterious. And similarly, for that to be able to be mapped onto our technology, where we are less obsessed with the devices. We are less attached to, for example, fueling a car with petrol. Like that's a structural necessity, but it's not a functional necessity. That's what open form is all about, where the form could shift. Maybe we can fuel cars in a different way. Maybe we can have technology displayed in a different hardware, because we're fascinated with the feminine technology, with the sharing of data, with the sensations in our body, with the way that the loop does want to be closed. People might want to travel, or maybe we can find a good reason for plastic to be turned back into a fuel, which they're working on with bacteria, or like, I don't know, when you break up with someone, like how can that be a closed loop? Do we just have to put our exes on a pile of people not to talk to? Like all this rubbish, all this garbage, all this unusable thing. I think our technology and our spirituality wants to be allowed to come out of the symbols and the frameworks of the form, so that the true integrated whole can pulse.
It's beautiful. It brings in for me almost the humanization or the dehumanization um, into that full integrative loop of like, even this garbage in its purest essence and purest form is usable. And so it's not objectifying anything or dehumanizing any part of the cycle or the system or the human or the things anymore, and bringing it into a more integrated feminine dialogue. The cyclical, the orbits. Some of your videos, like orbits. And so
I'd love to know, just as to add to also my conversation, so I can sort of bounce off that, what would you attribute to the feminine? Like, what are I know there's a lot of dialogue about masculine and feminine, but just so I know, like, what we're working with, like, what does it feel like to you, and also to learn from you, what is feminine? What's a feminine characteristic or quality?
well, it is essence. It is, I would say, psyche, soul, subconscious, fluid, sensing, emoting. Um, it can feel like chaos. And it can feel confusing to people who aren't, used to embodying the truth of the nature of chaos. And so it can look dysfunctional. It can be disharmonious. It can be when it's not, in its highest expression and esteem and value, kind of at the forefront of our society.
Mm,
But it is subjective. It's purely subjective, and it's allowed to be,
mm.
important to be. It's almost as if the way I saw the quantum field through my feminine essence was like, through that sensation, feeling the field, I have access to more data than the mind actually does, because
Totally, that's it. Yes, yeah.
it's more intelligent. It's actually supreme intelligence. I made a post quite a while ago, because it's not only that there's psychology that you can sense into, there's so much more. There's all those dimensions you were talking about
Mm,
in there. It's not just objectifying the space. And so when she's not in communication with that mental function, that's where we can get dysfunction.
yeah, nice. Thank you for that. That makes sense. And I'm interested because you mentioned in the list there the soul and the subconscious. In my mind, they're not opposites, but they've got very different functions. How does the feminine relate to those two things, the soul and the subconscious?
Well, I've broken these things into dimensions. So the subconscious is fluid, and the psyche, the soul, and the psyche and the subconscious, kind of for me, are intangible essences. They are the ones that create the material exchange, or the prima material
Hmm.
of what we're in communion with in on the world plane, or
I
the
like
world
that
stage.
prima material. That's beautiful.
I think it's a young term, so
Cool.
yeah.
And so it's interesting because you mentioned with the feminine being, oh, sorry, the subconscious, I should say, subconscious being fluid. And fluid obviously is a flow, which is an undulation through time and space. Like there's a fluctuation. And I was wondering if you felt that the soul was fluid. In my concept, I like to kind of feel this spaceless and timelessness of soul, but therefore it can't be fluid because flow indicates it's in the universe, fluctuating, pulsing. Um, but yeah, interested to see if you feel the soul is fluid or how it would relate in juxtaposition to the fluidity of the subconscious.
Well, my soul is very watery, so I'm extremely watery. So like I think that's where it's really subjective and personal. And so like we talked about astrology very briefly because you don't understand your chart, but it's like you're going to experience these energies differently, and like
Mm,
your experience is completely different from mine, and I
yeah.
don't understanding of, unless I can sense into, and
Mm,
feel around your experience, which is all feminine, I can't actually get into your experience until I'm in that intimate space within myself. And then I, can be that intimate with you and your soul. But
mm.
for me, it's not necessarily a fixed state, but maybe fluidity is fixed. So I don't
The
know.
paradox.
Yeah.
All the same is always the same. Yeah. I like talking about the intimacy of understanding each other. I think that comes down to trust. And that was something that we also spoke about just before, which I could bring in at this stage, which is the moment which I shared about with my partner, to do with the trust and like you're saying, the subjective view, your reality and soul and psyche and all these compartmentalizations of the oneness are a very unique perspective, and different to mine, and we can't necessarily cohabit until we dissolve into unity. We can't cohabit that, and that's the gift of life, of being something that can sense. And trust, that's what I've got tattooed on my neck, and my partner has tattooed, we got them together. It really feels like the key for me. And it's not just a gift. It's not like, oh, I'm going to be benevolent and altruistic and I'm going to trust you. There you go. Well done. You're trustworthy. Like that's only part of the whole process. For me, it's also very much a gift to self, because when I trust, I suddenly open. When I trust, I suddenly am spending time with another person I respect. When I trust, my absorbing of the data is different. It's like a child and their parents, how we deify and just totally implicitly trust our parents or whatever the other sort of thing is. And we take so much richness. They tell us about whatever Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, or they tell us our birthday is special, whatever. It's like, oh, it's special. We just trust it, and we can really receive the awe and the wonder of this moment. And so I really feel that I'm robbing myself of the experience of life, and of the intelligence of the people I talk to, and of the love of my friendships and relationships, if I don't trust the other person. Because I'm always putting it over there. I'm always like filtering it, needing to decode it so it makes sense to me. And this was a moment that I came to with my partner. And yeah, also just handing it out to men, but also to all people. But it does speak to a little bit of this duality through the stereotype of, oh, the crazy woman. Oh, she's saying this doesn't make sense. Oh, there's logic here, which is being defied. And this is kind of a stereotypical relationship between men and women, where men think they have something mentally over, or this clarity that is not being perceived by the woman who's being so feeling, who's being so sensorial and emotional, but there's this real judgment or hierarchy. It's like, you don't understand. And so I was in a conversation, and it was a very important conversation because we were sharing very personally about our intentions for our relationship and for a particular ceremony we wanted to engage in. And now that I talk about it, I'm really insulted by what I did, but she was reading her list of her points that she wanted to bring forward, like a long list. And after the very first point, I wanted to edit it. I was like, oh, so you say God there. And I started to give suggestions. And it's just like face palm. It's like, what? This is a personal, they're trying to share their love. They're trying to give you their intention and perspective. Like, how do you step into that stage? But I did. And it might be experience of a number of men who, through wanting to help or clarify or make it more workable, because my intention was, I thought if we reworded that point, it could be more functional for both of us, and it would land in both our universes, and it would therefore be a better precept or intention. So it was benevolent, but it was extremely unworkable. And I totally understand how insulting it is and that breaks trust, because like it's no longer a safe space to share your intimate, because it gets judged, it gets marked and edited immediately. And so from my suggestion of this edit, we suddenly went into this energetic, I could feel it in my body. I could like, oh my God. In my post, I talked about like going over the waterfall. It's like, oh, here we are holding on. And that within moments it can go all, and this also amplifies the male perspective of crazy. It's like, oh shit, I don't know how to get out of this. She's triggered and I'm triggered. And nothing I say, there's nothing I can grab onto right now that is going to be a usable tool to illuminate the clarity of my position. And so in that moment, and we'd been doing a lot of processes and a lot of reflection on our relationship, I just decided, like, shut up and trust. Time and time again, Nayla's perspective on our relationship has been really healing. Time and time again, what she's brought has educated me into a new version of myself. Time and time again, when I've just supported and witnessed and adored and trusted, the dance moves, the song, the way in the world, even in logistical masculine things like businesses and making money and all this sort of stuff, blossoms into this genius. Because it's life trusting itself and being witnessed, no imposition. And I just shut up. And because women are extremely sensitive to energy, and particularly my partner, as soon as I shifted that in myself, I could feel her armor and her shield go down too. And that is, I think, kind of the Christian idea of turning the other cheek. Is like, who's going to be the first person to, I mean, I instigated it. So I'm not saying I was Jesus, like just by being peaceful, like I'm the one who put the sword in the battleground to begin with. But yeah, can you be the first one to set down your sword? Can you just disarm yourself? And this is an internal battle, because it was me trying to fight for me, surrendering to myself so I could receive her. So in that moment, I was just like, shut up and listen. Shut up and let love speak. and I softened my disposition legitimately, not just falsely, not just like, oh, okay, I'll let you speak now, because that's another false kind of patronizing thing. It was
I
like,
love the
no,
voice.
yeah, I
Mhm.
legitimately didn't trust my own mind. That's a huge thing for a man and maybe anyone. I'm talking masculine, feminine, only because I am an embodied man, and probably it relates. And we're talking about light masculine and dark masculine in this interview. So to not trust one's own mind is a really big step. But I chose that because time and time again, being right or holding on to that position had been destructive. And we'd gotten to a point in our relationship just before that where it was literally like at breaking point, if not beyond. I really felt the rock bottom of not having the relationship. I really went through a process of a couple of days of grieving. I went through a process of just needing to be okay that it might not be a thing. And at the bottom of it, it was just this desire to love. And it was empowering because it was something I could do. Even regardless of what I received, it's something I could actively do. And it felt pure because it wasn't a mentally imposed thing. It was an innate heart-led desire. So remembering that in the conversation, I was just like, just trust. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe you are fooling yourself. This craziness, this external warping that you're trying to correct, maybe that's on your goggles, the rose tinted glasses, or the opposite of rose tinted glasses, the mud covered glasses. And so I did that legitimately, energetically, mentally, emotionally, and she could feel that. And our faces changed, like the way that we animate our physical form shifts. And she went from a stranger, from that person, even in the room, it felt like in our conflict that the room got really big and she was way over there, even though we were sitting on the bed together. It felt like she's really far. And when I shifted my energy and I didn't trust my mind and I just decided to listen and hold someone else's perspective as valid as my own, particularly when it's your partner, particularly when it's someone that on a core level, there's a compatibility and a trust and a beauty and a future you're creating. This is a co-creation. So here's my co-creator. Like, bear witness, form of prayer, bear witness. Pew, different. Her face changed to me, and maybe from herself as well. She was no longer guarded. We both breathed. I also didn't speak again. And it was a constant thing because I wanted, even though after the first time of telling myself to shut up, I wanted to say something again briefly after that. So like, again, shut up. And again, shut up. And hold yourself. And hold yourself. And then she proceeded, after we resolved that momentary imposition of my edit recommendation, she proceeded to speak the rest of her list. And it was so exquisite. It was this amazing universal voice, not just her voice, but for me, it was like my voice, articulating the vision of love, of what a relationship is, of how she's showing up, of how she loves me. And in that list, even though, I mean, we've been together for 2 years, but in that list, another piece dropped in of trust where it's like, wow, you really do love me. You really
Mm.
do see love like this. You really are giving yourself in a devotional way that I want to give myself to. And so it was incredible. Like, I almost missed out on all that by trying to improve the list at point one. There was this, my own voice was trapped behind the correct way of adjustment. And so, yeah, I just really want to hand that on as a as a tool from the fire that, like, well, we survived. And it's just to shut up and trust the other person. Like, if you love someone, I think it's the same as saying I trust the other person. And the mind is, and this is something I was reading yesterday, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but they were equating Satan with the mind. And yet the mind is so linked to identity, it becomes a thing we'll fight to the death to save. The things that define you, whether it be your precious home or your precious ring or a quality. It's like, I will not be of this sexual orientation, or I will not eat this particular thing, or I will not, whatever it is, all these things that we defend so passionately, ultimately, I think are a product of the mind. So that's a big part of what I endeavor to explore with open world, and what I'm encouraging in relationship in particular is what happens when you don't trust your own mind and you equate love with trust. You equate the other's survival and perception as valid as yours. And through personal experience, it finally allows you to receive the relationship which was right there the whole time. like she has been loving me and understanding me this way for our entire relationship, but not until that conversation did I really understand. And there's probably still other layers I've yet to receive, but
Mhm.
yeah, when you trust, you can finally, it's a gift to yourself, you finally receive. And you set the framework, talking about the masculine and feminine, you set the masculine framework for the feminine to dance in complete naturalness and wilderness and power. Why try and be in a relationship or love someone that you are controlling and who is a cookie cutter perfection look of your dream girl or woman or man or boy, when you can have an empowered, fully self-realized, natural, surrendered, vulnerable, alive, trusting partner to play with. But I believe that that will only happen when we set the container of true witness and true trust, and we open ourselves, put our mind aside, and love them with trust. Yeah, so hopefully that's useful. And I hope many other layers of everyone's relationship lands in them, because it's there. We just have to be open to receiving it.
That was really beautiful. I'd read the post that started to open that out, and I could just feel it. It was so important. Um, what is most important to me is like that the masculine or your mind, whether you want to frame it any old way, but it was like as if you needed to improve upon perfection, like this part of you just needed to deepen into that acceptance of the vulnerability of being loved at that moment, and that just shattered. And I find myself deepening into parts, not in similar ways because I'm not in co-creation and I'm not in a relationship, but it's shattering the illusion, the old illusion of love, and trusting that new opening and the new separation, because even in that process is kind of, she feels worlds apart from you. And then the coming back together, it's quite beautiful. And I just love the way that you were able to articulate this on your page, but right now it's just
Mm, thank
amazing. So thank you so much for bringing that through.
you. Pleasure, pleasure. And yeah, I totally hear what you're saying as well about the knitting together and not the separateness. Because when we talk about this masculine, feminine, it can seem like I'm saying, hey guys, like allow the feminine in to yourself, or let's choose the feminine as opposed to the masculine. But in open world, often with my embodiment practices, I talk about the yin path to yang. So it's like the snake eating its own tail. It's like you go up to the threshold of differentiation. And when we allow this, the softening, we actually receive the power. It's like with Taoist sexuality practices of the releasing. There's the masculine, maybe ejaculatory, penetrative kind of like moment. But what happens? Do you lose all your power when you soften? I don't think so. I think it actually allows all the power to flow. And so it's not choosing to be more feminine or masculine. It's just working out the balance. If you're a little bit too controlling, be a bit more chaotic. If you're a bit chaotic, create a container for yourself to be chaotic within. And there we get to have both. And that is something that also Nella often speaks about, is like, we don't have to choose. We don't have to be light or dark. We don't have to be masculine or feminine, right or wrong. Um, it is a natural completion of the cycle, the snake eating its own tail, where as we soften, we actually get power, we get clarity. So many times I lie in meditation and all these really clear ideas or masculine executable functions drop in when I'm stopping trying to be so logistical. So yeah, that's just the maybe final tail cherry on top of that piece. Is I'm not suggesting that we mistrust our mind to the point of having no mind. Well, yeah, Zen like no mind would be good, but the point is, it's not like we lose all faculties of logic. I think we actually come to a much deeper sentient logic when we have both.
Truly. Yeah.
Mm.
And I think that's almost reaching into the technological landscape of reality and bringing in a supreme form of intelligence, because within that yin, that yang from the universe can drop in, and then when it's time,
Mm-hmm.
you know it's time.
There's nothing but to go with the flow. Yeah.
Mhm.
Speaking of masculine containers, and I'm really fluid and open, but just so I know how much we can jam and chat, it's been close to an hour. Are you
Mhm.
cool to keep chatting, or
I do have to go grab the children. They're outside playing in the water, but yeah. So time
cool?
is relevant, unfortunately. Just kidding.
Cool.
Mhm.
So yeah, any last thing I can sort of bring home, or anything you want to know about me or open world? I mean, I can speak about the things I'm doing. If people are watching and want to know how to engage with me, like how can I serve this closing?
There was one thing you mentioned that was really important that you had going on
Mm.
currently, something that's ongoing.
Yeah,
But
cool.
I hadn't heard that aspect of your work before, so if you want to explain that to us, that would
Mm.
be beautiful close.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. So yeah, the things that I'm doing at the moment are on many fronts, but I guess to speak to essence, there's always opportunity to train with me going through the orbits. That's sort of in person and online, and that's the idea of like an internal martial art, ultimately freeing yourself into all archetypes and all communication lines in life. But that's just like an ongoing thing, so it's not unique to the next few weeks. What is unique is a performance art piece called The Chief Kneels. And it's something I would love to invite every single person watching this, particularly if you have a woman in your life that you would like to honor. It's a 24-hour performance artwork, and you can find out more via openworldtheatre.com, spelled either the American or the European way. And essentially what it is me going into a public space. That's why I have to wait until lockdown is lifted again here. We've just gone back into lockdown, unfortunately, for a couple of weeks. But once that's lifted, I'm going to go into a public space with a pair of shoes, which represents Naila, my partner, and be in a 2 meter radius area for 24 hours to develop a capacity to hold. I think these endurance artworks really develop a masculine capacity to not only hold another person, but also hold our own emotions and feelings and doubts and spikes and drops. And it's to raise awareness for domestic violence, and also to build capacity to have kind of relationships which blossom and can hold beyond the desire to be right or to control, or the things that violence can sometimes seem to solve. So I'm inviting people to come and stand with me. Obviously, I'll be doing it in Auckland, but I'd love people all around the world to sync up with me, at least in the same week, even not in the same 24-hour period. We go out, we find a space, even if you have to be social distanced from each other. We have a pair of shoes, and I think there's a real beauty and a visual power to that. Someone with a pair of shoes for 24 hours in the same space, maybe apart from toilet breaks, and cycling every hour in a different expression. So the first hour is sound, second hour is movement, third hour is words, and fourth hour is silence. And in that silence, you can meditate, you can pray, you can reflect, whatever it is. But it's a way that we can come together and just show, also demonstrate. It's a men's process, but I invite anyone that wants to, devote to women to join us. But it's demonstrating that we are doing the work. It's a visual representation of the behind the scenes men's circles and different things that we're doing to try and build capacity to better hold and to steer away from our reactionary, domineering kind of behaviors. And it's also, possibly even more importantly, an internal process to cultivate that capacity in men or lovers of women to be able to hold the feminine, to be more patient, to be more present, to be less judgmental, less of the mind, to be able to hold our own feminine, really, to be able to hold our own fluctuations and emotions and things like that. So we don't have to just splatter them over the other person. So we can empty ourselves, so we can really allow room for the love and the celebration of woman and the feminine to be present. So yeah, if that resonates with you, if you're someone who likes rites of passage, if you see a value in public displays of humanity, and I really believe in this because I think the media warps our perception of humanity and it alienates us from each other. I see someone on the news and I don't like them. I don't want to be a part of their whole species. But when we see each other in person, we eye gaze, or we spend time, we feel their biometrics, their pulse, their movement. I start to see myself in them. So if we can go out in public and demonstrate acts of beauty, of kindness, of spirituality, whatever that is for you, of love ultimately, I think this is a big way that we can lead forward through theater, but it's just human experience. So yeah, it was planned for next week, but like I said, I'm going to wait until lockdown comes out. Check out openworldtheatre.com. It's project called The Chief Kneels, be under the theatre section. And it's an invitation. It's free, it's participatory. It's a way that you can be a source point and spread what I'm trying to do through open world theatre, which is a sense of freedom, and it's a sense of play as life as a game. So yeah, that's what that is, The Chief Kneels.
So beautiful. Thank you. I want to do that when we're all ready. So I'm going to stay tuned for when we can go do, what was the terminology you used?
Not sure. An act of devotion.
Displays of
Oh, public
humanity.
displays of humanity. Public displays of humanity.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. Love that. I love that. I've watched you and Paisley.
Mm-hmm. Playing
Yeah.
Vicarious.
Oh, it's so fun. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a whole other thing that which we can't go into right now due to time. But yeah, check out Vicarious as well. It's another game where online people control us as human avatars in the game of life, and so that's also another invitation. Once lockdown is over, you can play me and steer me around the streets and help me have more of a fully realized human experience.
So fun. You are just, yes, the whole ball of wax. So intelligent, so freaking hilarious. I love your content. I will show up for Dick Ram, Ashram, and Fanny ranting all day long. So I just love it. So I really appreciate your work and all your time and effort put into everything. And just thank you, Atlas, for being who you are. And
Thank you.
just a
Thank you,
breath
Alice.
of fresh air.
Thank you for bringing us all together. I look forward to seeing some of the other presenters in this online summit you're bringing together. Thank you for doing the work. I'm with you.
You're welcome. It's a joy and a pleasure. So we'll talk soon.
Yeah, thank you. Big love. Thanks for playing.